Welcome to another edition of Sailing Gargoyle Tips and Tricks. This week is a special episode for us as we look back at our very first YouTube episode ever, where we made the passage from Vancouver Island to San Francisco. Now, since that time, we've sailed over 10,000 nautical miles, but we still get the most questions about how to make the passage from the Pacific Northwest down to Central California. So, while we're here in Red Frog Marina in beautiful Bocas del Toro, Panama, we wanted to take the time to answer some of those questions. In preparation for this episode, we reached out to 3 other fellow sailing channels on YouTube: Breaking Waves Sailing, Sailing Octopodes, and then Cruising Meraki. We wanted to get the questions they had as they prepared to make the same passage. Some of the questions that we will answer in the upcoming episode include: what approach did you take and why to routing? What was the main hazard you encountered on the trip? What was your watch cycle? And what did you use for weather routing? In answering the questions that we've gotten, we've grouped them into a number of categories. The very first thing to consider is, when should you go? In our case, we wanted to do a shakedown cruise with Gargoyle. So we spent the summer cruising up northern BC, into Alaska, and then down the west coast of Vancouver Island. But when you're looking at deciding when to go, there's one main factor you need to consider.
And that is the weather. So the best time to head down the coast is between April and September. And this is due to a weather system called the Aleutian Low. Typically, the Aleutian Low from April to September moves north into the Bering Sea, providing a high pressure ridge along the west coast of the United States. This gives you the perfect downwind sailing to head south.
One of the questions that we get frequently is, how do we monitor weather and weather routing while we're cruising? We use Predict Wind and Predict Wind's offshore package in conjunction with our Iridium Go satellite to download daily weather files. Now, at times we'll download more often during the day, but typically we'll do at least one download to check the weather forecast and then plan our route accordingly.
There are other means. You can download grid files through other email applications. And as well, NOAA has a great email bot that will send forecasts to you if you do have satellite connections or even cellular connections when you're going down the coast. And we'll put that link in the bio below.
After you've decided what time of the year you're going to make the trip, the next important question that we always get is, what route down the coast did you choose? Now, we've used 2 books when we were preparing primarily. Exploring the Pacific Coast by Don and Renee Douglass, and then of course the World Cruising Routes, which is really the Bible from Jimmy Cornell.
Every sailor should have this.
Absolutely. This thing is well worn on our boat. Now, this book, when we look at this one, we like the Exploring the Pacific Coast because they break it down in great detail and they give you 3 different options. Really what it is 2 routes with a compromise. So you've got the inshore route, which keeps you 1 foot on land, if you will, where every night you're stopping inshore, or the blue water route, which takes you between 15 and 40 nautical miles offshore and gets you out from some of the hazards you may encounter. The 3rd route they call the express route, and that's a compromise, where you stay 15 nautical miles or closer to shore. Makes it very easy if you do decide to run in, but at that range you can then also be outside of most of the hazards.
We chose the blue water route, so we decided to go straight to San Francisco. This book is great. We can't recommend it enough. It actually has coordinates that you can hit if you are taking the blue water route, so we highly recommend this.
For choosing the routes, we also selected the blue water route to keep us away from some of the hazards that we had heard about. Typical hazards, if you're going on a coastal route, will be crab pots, fishing fleets, and then of course bar crossings. We didn't cross any bars coming down the Pacific Northwest coast, and we're glad we didn't, because we did have a bit of experience with one in El Salvador, and I think we're going to pass on bar crossings.
Not going to do it again.
Not going to do it again.
Unless we absolutely have to.
Yes. However, we did find that even going out 40 nautical miles wasn't enough to keep us away from the fishing fleets. First couple of nights off the coast of Washington and Oregon, we ran across very large fleets of fishing boats, including some very large, I would say they were commercial processing boats that were lit so brightly fore and aft that you actually couldn't tell which direction they were going. And none of these vessels were on AIS. Also, hailing them on the VHF is almost impossible because there are so many boats out together and you don't know who you're hailing. So it's a challenge. We actually went as far out as 100 nautical miles off the coast just so that we could have a bit of relaxation in the cockpit. So be aware of the fishing fleets. Other hazards that we did encounter, we did see one container ship or freighter when we were down off the coast of Oregon. It was running about 15 nautical miles off the coast, and we could see it on AIS and see it on radar, but until we were literally right upon it, you couldn't see any lights on it whatsoever. That confirmed for us that our choice to have AIS aboard Gargoyle is a good one.
This also opens up the conversation of VHF communications. Everybody's got a different idea. We have just come to the realization that if you don't know where they're going, to just hail them and find out. It just relieves all the stress of having to dodge a 1,000-foot tanker or cargo ship that is potentially going to run you over.
If there's one thing that I've learned from Carla, it is get on the VHF. However, I suspect that at 2 a.m., crossing a desolate part of the Caribbean, to hear a woman's voice on the VHF talking to the tankers is different than when I were to call them.
I don't know about that, but they're always very friendly. They're always willing to move around us so that we don't have to change sail.
Yes, get comfortable with your VHF. You will use it a lot. Other hazards, weather was fine on our passage down. We did have winds up to probably 25, 30 knots at one point, but a very comfortable point of sail. And it was a very nice sail down the coast. We motored about 20% of the time because we did hit some calm weather as well. But other than that, it was a wonderful sail.
Other things we did just to make sure we had somewhere to run to if the weather did turn was, and again, I can't recommend this book enough, is we went through all of the anchorages that are highlighted in this book, did the research to see which ones Gargoyle would fit in because there's a lot of bridges and a lot of depth issues, and put them in our Navionics chart so we knew if there was a port nearby, we'd be able to run to it if the weather did turn. A note, again, with bar crossings, if the weather pipes up, try to get in as soon as possible because some of those bars you're not able to cross in heavy weather.
So while we're on the topic of planning, one thing to keep in mind is that it's not just about the start and the passage, but also how you finish the trip. As San Francisco is on everybody's bucket list, we highly recommend that you do it well rested and at the right time because of the tides, the weather, and especially the fog. So we made a stop in Bodega Bay, California, which is a wonderful place. We stayed at the Spud Point Marina. Wine country, you're right near Sonoma County, just beautiful. And probably the one thing we'll never forget was the cheapest diesel. That's right. You will never find diesel fuel that cheap again on your trip. So we highly recommend it. We rested there and we toasted our first extended offshore passage. And what better place than California's wine country? After that, we then staged down to a very popular anchorage in all of the books, which is Drake's Bay. We found Drake's Bay to be a bit rolly and also shallow as you got close to shore. So BC boaters, this will be your first introduction to anchoring in very shallow water. Get used to that as well.
Yes, all of the California anchorages have swell. They all have ocean swell. So you really need to be prepared for a little bit of rocking and rolling.
So take the time while you're there, read the tide tables, and plan your entrance into San Francisco carefully. You'll love it. It is truly a bucket list moment, but it can be a little daunting because of all of the traffic lanes, all of the fishing boats, the tides, the reefs. Just make sure you're ready for it, and we recommend you be well rested. So when we talk about timing, one thing we should mention is a little tip for you as well. The extremely popular and well-attended Baja Ha Rally tends to leave out of San Diego in November. So if you're planning to go down the coast from the Pacific Northwest, you're going to see more and more boats out at sea as you're making the trip. Now, it's not a problem from a navigation standpoint, but if you're planning on staying in marinas, you're going to need to make reservations, because you will see that they will start to fill up. You will also see that your costs will go up as you get down to San Diego, so you'll pay a premium. There are great anchorages. We've covered those in other episodes, but we just wanted you to be aware of that. You will see a lot more boat traffic.
All the anchorages are in this book. Most of them are free. So definitely, if you're on a budget, there's a lot of opportunities where the costs will not get astronomical.
We've covered a lot so far, but we do have a few other kind of miscellaneous questions. So we wanted to make sure that we hit on these as well, and we'll kind of go back and forth. Carla, did we use paper charts for backup?
We do not have paper charts outside of the Pacific Northwest. A, they're really expensive, and B, they're getting harder and harder to find. So what we've done is a lot of redundancy on the boat. We have navionics, as well as navionics on our phones, as well as CMAP on a couple of our computers. We have 2 GPS systems in our Ray Marine, one that goes with our multifunction display and another external one. And then we actually have an adapter for our laptops, another GPS adapter, which I highly recommend you buy before you leave North America, because they're extremely hard to find. So that if anything happens with our electronics, we have another electronic system that we can back up. It's other than,
Yep.
satellites fall on Earth, we're covered.
And if all the GPS satellites go off, we've got worse things to worry about. And we have a compass that tells us where the shore is. So, and a radar. So not overly worried about that either.
There might be zombies there, so we might just stay at sea.
True. We did survive the pandemic. The watch cycles that we used. I know we just re-watched our episode 1, and in that we talked about a variety of watch cycles. What we've found now that works really well for us is to be a bit flexible in our watch cycles. We tend to start with a 4-hour watch and we alternate those watches, but we have gone to doing 2 watches at night, a 6 to midnight and a midnight to 6 a.m. as well, whatever you're comfortable with. The one thing that's important that we want to mention that we've learned is what we call the rule of 3, which is that by the 3rd night, you're now tired enough and comfortable enough on the boat, you can actually sleep. So figure for the first couple of days, it's going to be a little rough when you get into those night passages, but by the 3rd day, everything settles down and is a wonderful thing.
Neither one of us really get seasick, but we have talked to a lot of people that do, and actually for the first time in the Caribbean, when we hit some really heavy weather, I actually felt a little queasy. Take drugs. This is not a time to be a hero, especially if there's only 2 of you on the boat, because when you get into heavy weather, you tend to shorten your watches, because being up in the cockpit can be relatively, not stressful, but just wearing. I've had a lot of people that refuse to take them and they end up getting really sick. And it can put a lot of stress on the other person if they have to single hand, especially during heavy weather.
And really on that topic, one of the things that everyone always recommends is before you make a big passage and you've got the journey of a lifetime ahead of you, we would recommend you do at least 1 overnight passage so you can see how your body reacts to it. Our very first overnight passage was from Haida Gwaii to the northern tip of Vancouver Island. Definitely a rough passage. We had really good mixed seas and good strong winds. We had some encounters with cruise ships. Does everybody remember what cruise ships are? Because we don't see those anymore. Practiced on the radio and the VHF with hailing them, and we found out that we didn't get seasick. This is the time to do it before you depart on a major journey. Find out if you do get a little bit queasy. Maybe you plan harbor hopping instead of doing the blue water route.
And Kevin did mention the magic 3 days. Even for us, it typically takes 3 days to get into a routine. So when it comes to planning your passage, I typically make 3 kind of prepared meals that we can eat relatively easy. Part of our routine that every day we have at least 1 hot meal together, whether it's like a late lunch or an early dinner. It's just really good to get like warm food into you and have that routine, especially when longer passage. And you'll find that the overnights and the 2-day and the 3-day sails are actually kind of the most uncomfortable passages that you'll make.
Yeah, absolutely. In the first couple of days, if it's just the 2 of you on the boat, you won't see very much of your spouse on that trip. You're just basically passing each other on the way to bed to try to catch a couple of hours of sleep. Well, we're talking about that preparing for the trip in advance. Okay, we mentioned that, do an overnight passage. What about the boat? Any recommendations on what to do with the boat?
Get to know your systems as much as you can. We had 2 years in the making before we departed, so it was really great for us to be able to understand a lot of gargoyle systems. We also brought a lot of spare parts on the boat, right?
We do. We have bags and bags of spare parts in the boat. And what's the one thing when you buy spare parts that we've now learned? You never need them.
You never need them.
The parts you have, those aren't the ones that break.
There's a lot of lists online, and if you want to contact us, we actually have a list of spare parts and things that we do keep on the boat that we find are essential. It's just typically the parts that we have to order are those parts that you never thought would fail, of course.
So one question that we've gotten that people have noticed from our previous episodes is that we keep a log. So we do get a lot of questions about what information are we writing down in the log?
We typically do the log every hour. We have our long and lat, our heading, our speed, our course over ground, the wind direction and speed, as well as pressure. And you'll kind of notice that you'll see a trend either in pressure or wind, pressure and wind. Of course, pressure decreases, wind increases. But it's just good in the event that you do have a failure. You know within 30 minutes or 50 minutes where your last location was, so you can plot it down and then figure out your course if you need to steer by compass.
Another thing that we get asked frequently, is there any advice or things that we had known before we left, things we're glad that we've done? For me, there's a couple of things that I'd say. Number one, we had actually watched a great YouTube episode of a couple that was in the Atlantic Ocean, and the rudder fell off their Beneteau. They were just sailing along, the shaft gave way and their entire rudder fell off. They did a brilliant job of recovering and sailing after an enormous amount of effort into another anchorage. But that put the fear of God in me. So when we pulled the boat, we did have our rudder drop because we are the third owners of this boat. And you never know what somebody else has done with the boat. So for peace of mind for me, knowing that the rudder shaft had never been damaged and actually having the bearing tightened as well at the same time was wonderful. Any quick words of advice? Any little tips or tricks that you want to throw out there?
For the big passage down the coast, we picked a date, and we were going to leave on that date. So what I did was I started downloading weather and predict wind about 3 weeks before that date, and really started to see some of the trends that were going on down the coast of the US. And that gave me the confidence, because I was the weather router, to decide that date or around that date when the weather was going to be best for us to go. As well as doing your own weather routing, there are weather routers. If you feel the need to use them, I would definitely use them. Going to the Galapagos, we actually used a weather router, and Trevor Richards did a great job for us. We'll put his link in the bio below. But use them. They're there. It's an opportunity to get some experience with someone who really understands the weather.
So here's a quick tip for you that you may not have read anywhere else. If you're sailing down the west coast of the United States, you will see a lot of military traffic, a lot of Navy traffic. They do a brilliant job of getting on VHF channel 16 and warning you where there's live fire exercises around you and telling you what areas by lat and long to avoid. However, when they give it to you, they don't really repeat it, and you need to be ready for it. So get a pad of paper and a pen and keep it at the helm station. Just get something to take a note and jot it down. You don't want to be going through a live fire exercise. And the US Navy will tell you in no uncertain terms that you need to get the hell out of the way.
We did not get that through experience, by the way. We stayed very far away. We get a ton of our information from books and on websites, but our number one source is
social media. So if you're preparing to leave, and we know a lot of our questions came from fellow YouTube channel members, but if you're getting ready to leave, we recommend a couple of apps in particular. Number one, Instagram has been fantastic. So post on Instagram, post information, post pictures, and you'll start to develop a following that you can then reach out to and ask questions of. Also, the rest of the world communicates on WhatsApp. So if you're not a WhatsApp user, download WhatsApp, start to use it and get familiar with it. When you get to Central America, nobody wants to talk to you on the phone. They want to talk to you via WhatsApp.
Caribbean as well.
And the Caribbean. Yeah. One other thing we wanted to mention was, since we went to San Francisco, and most of you will likely make a San Francisco stop as well, if you've not been there before, be prepared. So our home marina is in downtown Vancouver. We transit English Bay, and what we used to thought of was a busy port. No. San Francisco is insane. If you're on a weekend and you're out sailing around, the number of boats that you will see out is unlike anything you've ever seen before. Fabulous sailing community there. Just be prepared for it and do your research, because it does get very hectic and it can be a little bit stressful. So that's all we've got for you today. If you're watching this and you have more questions, absolutely put them in the comments below, or check out our website at sailinggargoyle.com. You can contact us through there. We're more than happy to provide information and give you what we've learned on the trip. We certainly don't know everything, but in 2 years, we want to make sure that we share what we have learned as well. We'd also like to thank the sailing channels that help contribute to this episode. So those again, and definitely check these out. Breaking Wave Sailing with Ben and Allie. Sailing Octopodes and Christine and Pally. You'll have to let me know if I pronounce that correctly.
Crazy name.
It is a name that's hard to say. And then Cruising Meraki, which I'm just fascinated as I follow these individuals. It's actually 3 generations that have gotten together, and they're planning to sail away and sail around the world.
And Ben, rest up in San Francisco, because Maverick Surf Break is just a day's sail around the corner in Half Moon Bay.
We're going to look forward to seeing that episode where you tackle Mavericks.
If you like this episode, please click the subscribe button below, and ciao for now.
Something on my tooth.
No, you don't.
Oh, feels like it. Are you ready? No?
Yeah, I'm always ready.
Well, I have to cue it up.
I'm drawing a blank. You go first.
Could took a lot of vodka today. That's new. Jesus. This is why I don't like doing videos where we both talk, because if I get it right, it's lucky. But if both of us get it right, it's a fucking miracle in one take. Let's talk about the Aleutian Low. Dr. Science. Let's talk about the Aleutian Low. And then it pulls in a high pressure zone.
Because I have this, slide.
Now once you've, so now,
you go blah 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 blah. Interesting.